are some theologians and preachers who will be tempted to justify and defend their practice of delivering redacted gospels. If you are one of them, let me explain the uphill task ahead of you by giving you 10 things that you have to demonstrate. 1. You need to explain the criteria you used to arrive at your version of the gospel. 2. You need to prove that the criteria you used is reliable and able to produce consistent results regardless of the person that applies the said criteria. 3. You need to demonstrate how your version conforms to the gospel the apostles heralded. In other words, you need to prove that if you stood in front of the apostles, like Paul did in Galatians chapter 2, the apostles will not add anything to your version of the gospel. Some of you will try to make the case that you relied on the epistles to come up with your versions. If you rely only on the epistles to identify the components of the gospel, the Berean will remind you that the gospel was first preached before the epistles were written, and the epistles were addressed not to unbelievers, but to saints who had already believed the gospel. Since Galatians chapter 1, verse 6 to 9, indicates that all the apostles were heralding a similar message, you need to prove, using clear, biblical evidence, that your version is similar to the one the apostles heralded to unbelievers. 4. You need to prove, using behavioral consistency tests, that the apostles' behavior, while heralding the gospel, is consistent with the belief that your version of the gospel is the gospel. In other words, you need to prove that both the apostles Peter and Paul believed that your version of the gospel is the gospel that all should herald. 5. You need to show that your version of the gospel conforms to the will of the owner of the message, the Lord Jesus Christ. This means you have to show that your version is similar to the one the Lord gave to both the 12 apostles and to Apostle Paul, as it is written in Galatians 1 verse 12. 6. You need to show how your version meets the criteria of sending a message of good news to someone who is facing imminent danger. 7. You need to demonstrate how you can reconcile all biblical doctrines with your version of the gospel. 8. You need to prove that people who hold diverse false beliefs will not be disenfranchised by your description of the gospel. This means you have to demonstrate how the key elements of your version address particular false beliefs. 9. You need to prove that your version of the gospel can be used as an effective gauge that can expose an omission in another preacher's gospel. And 10. You need to prove that the transference of the gospel to the next generation will not be affected by the preaching of your version of the gospel. You need to do all of that to demonstrate the authenticity of your version of the gospel. This is why the Berean posted so many sermons to support his thesis, so that he may demonstrate beyond reasonable doubt that his version of the gospel meets all these requirements. Of course, if you do not believe that the apostles were laying the foundation of how we should describe the gospel, you will find an excuse of preaching a redacted or false gospel. However, the burden of proof will still be on you to prove beyond reasonable doubt that the apostles were not setting a precedential foundational standard on how all preachers ought to describe the gospel. We eagerly await to see where you will obtain the biblical evidence to justify the preaching of redacted gospels. Even as you attempt to build that Tower of Babel, please remember Paul's warning to the Galatians. But though we, or an angel from heaven, preach any other gospel unto you than that which we have preached unto you, let him be accursed. As we said before, so say I now again, if any man preach any other gospel unto you than that ye have received, let him be accursed.